Is this thing on? What's up, everybody? Welcome back. The long hiatus of the Apples to Apples podcast is complete. You know, my infamous line, been a minute. It's been more than a minute. It's been months. We're back. We're better than ever. We're going to get this thing back on the road. We missed a lot. Going to try to cover all of it here. Not too much time on this episode, but, all the stuff that we missed. What was the last episode I did, like February, March? I mean, it has been a minute. There you go. I repeated the line since I last did one of these. But it's episode 63. But it's episode 63. Back in my head, I was saying we had a particular headline we were waiting for in this city. We had a playoff run, and just short of the finals, another team that shared an arena with said playoff run that didn't even get to reach the playoffs in the first place, yet both firing their current head coaches, replacing them with new ones. And while we're going to get into Mike Sullivan in a bit to spoil the Rangers head coaching search, it was white smoke that littered the orange and blue skies, bringing in Mike Brown as the latest head coach of the New York Knicks. And a highly debated firing of Tom Thibodeau. Many people taken aback by the fact that Leon Rose, James Dolan, and company even decided to pull the trigger on it in the first place. I mean, people like me who were on board with doing it and, kind of seeing, the old thank you for everything you've done, Mr. Thibodeau. But, at this point, we've peaked with you here calling the shots. I mean, I was on record saying, Thibodeau's the perfect guy for what he came here to do. He's going to be the guy when your team's in the mud, when your franchise is in purgatory, in hell, and it feels like just the success of your team is nowhere in sight. He's the type of guy you bring into the locker room like, hey, we're going to get things right. We're going to right the ship. I'm not going to get you a ring, but I'm going to get you back to being relevant. And that's exactly what he did, bro. We're talking about the days of Jeff Hornacek and David Fizdale. I mean, they were the laughing stock, one of the laughing stocks, if not the laughing stock of the NBA. The old Knicks for clicks, that infamous day in 2019 when we thought we were getting KD or Kyrie. And they both came to New York City. They just didn't go to Manhattan, obviously going to Brooklyn, along with DeAndre Jordan, the infamous Woj bomb. And they went 0 for 3. Just not with DeAndre Jordan, wound up going 0 for 3 with the beard a couple years later. Whereas you're looking at a Knicks team that kind of dodged a bullet with that. Obviously Brunson coming in a few years later, signing a Brunson that you would not know at the time would go on to go from a respectable player in the league to arguably a top 15, hell, even top 10 player overall in the league. Now, top 10 is probably a stretch, but you get my point. He was not signed. When he was signed, he was not a top 10, 15, 20 player in the league. And they kind of went a separate route that Brooklyn did where, it imploded. They kind of went the longer route, eventually bringing in Josh Hart. Randall had already been there from the KD Kyrie offseason. Obviously, he wasn't expected to be what they signed at the time as well, but not as much to an extent as Brunson. And they just kind of had like the building blocks, of we're not going to go and buy everybody all at once. Even though they may have tried to do that, we'll never know. They were forced to go a separate route, and it wound up working out for the better. And Tom Thibodeau kind of overseeing that, the run with Atlanta, either his first or second year, I'm not sure, but early on, obviously went up in flames in Game 5, the infamous Trae Young and everything, and the rest was history. But you go back and look at that team, right? Elfrid Payton, Reggie Bullock, Alec Burks. I mean, it was a miracle they even got to the playoffs. So that was kind of like a credit to Thibs that they not only got to the playoffs, not only hosted a playoff series on MSG, on the MSG hardwood for the first time in 2013. Well, I don't even think they had home court back then, but I mean, the fact that there was playoff basketball at the Mecca for the first time in, almost a decade at that point. They went out sad. They went out sorry. Trae Young had the whole city, throwing an expletive in front of his name, right? We still hear it to this day. It's him and Altuve, right? And we'll get to the baseball in a little bit too. But you look back at that team, man, there was no championship aspiration to be had. And that could be revisionist history. That could be, copium. But you look back at that team, bro, that team was not winning a ring. So credit to Thibs on that one. Now, they missed the playoffs a year after, but It was tic-tac-toe the next 3 years. And specifically, I think this year, here's kind of why it was such a shock to people that he got canned this year, was because last year going out in 7 against Indy, even though you had home court, an Indy team that really nobody expected whatsoever. And really the only reason the Knicks, or a lot of people said the only reason the Knicks lost to them in 7 was because the injuries were piling up, right? OG had the hammy. He started game 7, hit the 3 early on, and he could barely even walk in transition, let alone run. They took him out of the game like 5 minutes in, and the fact that they tried starting him told you all you need to know. Right, Mitch Robinson was in and out of the lineup. I don't actually know. I think he was out for good. He was one of the ones that was out for good. Josh Hart had like the internal injuries, and then Brunson wound up breaking his hand in Game 7, and that's when they were just shot. It felt like DiVincenzo was the only guy that was, at 100%. Hell, Randall, if you remember the whole Jaime Jaquez, that was the last game he ever played in a Knicks jersey, right? So that was the whole thing that, injury after injury after injury, and it just got to them, and it was too much to handle. And Indy just kind of, blew the doors off him in Game 7. And it was like the big what if we ever saw them in the playoffs again. Well, we had to wait about a year and some change to see that come into fruition. And real quick, if you go back to 23, was another series they had home court in, the Miami series, where being the 4-5, where we took care of Cleveland in 5 games. If you remember, people were like cheering, like, because, Miami was the 8 seed. Took out Milwaukee being the 1 seed that year, and people were saying, hell yeah, we're getting the 8 seed. We're beating the living shit out of Miami. We're gonna get the chance to beat the living shit out of Miami. And it was the complete opposite. Jimmy Butler did his way with us. Bam Adebayo, forget it. I mean, it was like the old Pat Riley full circle. Miami, Indy kind of 1A, 1B in terms of the non-divisional rivals. And then just, 2 years in a row. But all of a sudden you come to this year, right? You take care of Detroit in the first round. Kind of a little bit of a potential Cinderella story you got to worry about. People talking about, is Detroit kind of, the big bad Cinderella story to be had? Even not only speaking in terms of the NBA, but you kind of see the resurgences with the Lions and the Tigers, before the Pistons all of a sudden hit the map this year with Cade. They take them out in 6, the infamous Brunson buzzer beater. And, that was that. Then you get Boston. And when you take care of Boston in 6 games, right? I mean, Tatum went down with the injury was Game 4, right? It was Game 4 because then they got blown out in Game 5, and then they took care of business on home court. Yep. So here's the thing with the Boston series: it's the fact that the 2 games. First of all, anybody tells you that they solely won that series because Tatum was out is bullshit. Because they lost those first 2 series as Tatum was playing minute after minute. Remember, Mikal Bridges, the unsung hero, who, he is not a name we were not excited to say all season long. Obviously, all the first-round picks we gave up, all the draft capital, and kind of, you look back at that trade, like, I don't know, what's the return policy on him, right? While him being the unsung hero, having the game-clinching steal or turnovers in both games, had the steal Game 1, the block on Tatum Game 2. You go up 2-0, you take both games on the park, what's it? The parquet? I forgot whatever it's called. They got that unique court, but regardless, the old saying, a series don't start till the road team wins. Well, they took the first 2. Boston took Game 3 at the Garden, but you take Game 4. Now there's kind of the old Tatum went down. We don't know if if Boston would have went on a run in those final minutes, but hey, they were already down in that series, and they were already down in that game. It's not like they were up and the Tatum being out caused him to blow a lead. Regardless, not to, go too far into the weeds with that series. They win that series at 6. You knock out the defending champions that people looked at as like one of the big 3, where the narrative during the season 2 was the Knicks were like 0-7 against Boston, Cleveland, and OKC. And meanwhile, while they're beating the living shit out of Boston, Indy takes care of Cleveland in 5 games. So there are 2 of the 3 of this so-called big 3 that you couldn't beat, both of which are in your conference. And now here you are eyeing up the team that this past year we just said, if we get another crack at you in the playoffs, when we're fully healthy, it might be a different story. And instead this year, you're fully healthy. They didn't really have injuries either because Halpern got injured in the finals. It's 100%. There's the whole thing with the guy that they brought in from the offseason to the trainer that won some award because of the durability of the team. Like, they barely missed any time. Really, any time anybody missed was Mitch Robinson, like the first half of the year. But once he came back, he was balling out, man, besides him at the free throw line. But other than that, he was balling out. And the guy who's the epitome of missing time, guy gets out of bed the wrong way and he's missing time, he was able to stay on the court. So there was no, backtrack in any way to sugarcoat it with injuries or nothing. You were going full-fledged. This is the series to be at. And I have not I have not done one of these. I've missed a shit ton. One of the most, one of the biggest things to highlight since I last recorded one of these was Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. And right there, whether you want to admit it or not that night, whether you want to admit it after Game 2, after Game 4, after Game 6, when Indy was heading to the finals, they lost the series in Game 1. And you could even say they had a chance to right their wrongs at Game 2. You win Game 2, it's a 1-1. You're like, yeah, you know what? Game 1 was an unimaginable hiccup, but we made up for it. You split the 2 at home. Now go split 2 on their court. But, bro, when you blow a lead, that's not even blowing that lead. The term blown lead doesn't even do it justice. You're up 15-something with like 2 minutes left in the game. That should not even count as a comeback. That is like legitimate, unfathomable, bro. They're flashing up stats. They're talking about something that's happened like 3 or 4 times out of like the 1,200 plus scenarios. And 3 out of the 4, or all 4 of them, something. Indy had done it round after round after round. It was Game 5 against Milwaukee, Game 1 or Game 2 against Cleveland, and then Game 1 against New York. I mean, they were legitimately doing stuff that we had never seen before. When you got a guy like Aaron Nesmith who's pulling up from the logo, from the corner, from the wing, fadeaways, in stride, you name it, bro. He could have hocked it up blindfolded it was going to fall. I mean, look, I'm the first person that's going to tell you, talking about you fall asleep at the wheel. Right, it ain't over till there's triple zeros on the shot clock or on the game clock. Yogi Berra, all this and that. Right, I'll be the first one to say that no lead is safe. How about Falcons is the easy one to say, right? How many other ones are there, right? I don't even think you could use that in this situation, in the situation of Game 1, where you're talking about what had to happen for that comeback to come into fruition. Every single thing had to fall into place perfectly, and for Indiana it did. And people were talking about the devil magic and the whole Jim Irsay dying. We're at the start of the run talking about how Jim Irsay's final tweet was "Let's go Pacers," and that's like legitimate, which is creepy as hell. But I mean, realistically speaking, bro, it was legitimately had to be like something like we've never seen before, what Indy was doing. And you're talking about a second crack at the Pacers in the playoffs. And not only did you not have the fallback of the injuries, it went one last game this time around. And you got absolutely embarrassed in a do-or-die Game 6 where it was a do-or-die Game 5 too on your home court. You kind of extended the series. Game 6, they were completely flat. I think it was like the third quarter. They missed like 15 shots in a row. There was one quarter they were done. I think it was like a 3-point game at halftime, and at the end of the third quarter it was like a 20-point game. The game was done like right at the start of the fourth quarter. It was a joke. It was a slow and painful death for a season that once you took out Boston, you should have been riding a high of who's going to stop us. This is as big as the window is going to be, is what should have been the thought process. And what I saw from that Thibs ran locker room was a team that felt like they were just going to, trance right back into the mix of things that, next year. And now, kind of in hindsight, series by series, we saw Dame go down in round 1, and he wound up getting waived. We'll get to the free agency and stuff in a minute. Dame, was originally going to miss a year. Now he's completely off the Bucks. Tatum's going to miss a year with Boston. Halliburton's going to miss a year with Indiana. So now you're looking at, and some of these teams could still make a run. You're looking at Boston still got Jaylen Brown. They still got Derek White. They lost a couple pieces with the second Abram. They got rid of Porzingis and Drew Holiday, but they still got pieces, bro. And even Indiana, you look at how frisky TJ McConnell was when Halliburton was just getting a breather, anything, bro. Injury, TJ McConnell was on the court. He was putting up 10, 15 points a night and double machine. So he's no write-off neither. And they still got Siakam. Now, they did lose Miles Turner, which is interesting. Longest tenured pacer by like a mile and a half. They finally, reached the cream of the crop, and now he dips for. He doesn't not only leave, he leaves for Milwaukee. He's staying in the division. But I'll get to the free agency in a second. Now that this conference is as open as it's ever going to be, and if you're the way I looked at it, like I said before, Thibs is the perfect guy that if you're irrelevant and you want to be back in the mix of things, you bring a guy like him into the locker room and you kind of, reset the standpoint of the locker room. He did it with Chicago. He did it with Minnesota. They were irrelevant before he got there. He got there. They got back onto the scene. They never got a ring while he was there. And you could point the finger back at it. You say, well, they got even worse once he left. Chicago, you look back at what Chicago did when they fired him. They hired Fred Hoiberg, first-time head coach. Minnesota, Ken Thibodeau. They hire Ryan Saunders, I think it was Ryan Saunders, Chris Saunders. Either way, first-time head coach. They're go right back into being irrelevant. This time around, you hire Mike Brown, and I like the move. I'll tell you this. On the surface, I don't know if Mike Brown is the championship pedigree head coach that Thibs wasn't. I don't. Because, you could write it up right away and say what I just talked about with Thibs to Chicago, Minnesota, and most recently New York is what Mike Brown just did in Sacramento. But I'll say this, I'm glad it wasn't Johnny Bryant because I feel like Johnny Bryant would have just been like Hoiberg and Saunders. The guy I really wanted was Michael Malone. And I heard a lot of people talk, specifically Denver fans, were saying like Malone is essentially Thibs just with a ring on his finger. And obviously that ring, 80%, and 80 is a little harsh, but the far majority of the percentage of who gets credit for it is Nikola Jokic. There's no doubting that. No disrespect to Murray and Porter and all them, but that team is Nikola Jokic. But he's got the ring, bro. Even like a guy like Taylor Jenkins, people are talking about, like, the offensive mastermind that he is and what he was able to get out of John Morant and Triple J in them. But I like Mike Brown because A, I think he brings that culture-changing aspect with a little more intensity, but B, just kind of like I knew we were at a stalemate with Thibs. I don't know if we're going to be at a stalemate with Mike Brown. I feel like Mike Brown has the potential to be the needle mover and bring us to, the pinnacle of not only winning the East, because it shouldn't just be about winning the East, bro. Somebody's got to, dethrone OKC too. And you're looking at an OKC team I just talked about what went wrong in Brooklyn and what went somewhat right, in terms of the somewhat resemblance of building from the inside with the Knicks, even though you did sign Brunson and trade for Hart and all of them, but you didn't go chasing the big three. It didn't work out in Brooklyn. It just didn't. It just imploded in Phoenix. It didn't work out in Milwaukee, really. I mean, the days of building, who knows if it's going to work out in Houston. The days of building the big three are pretty much done. You look at OKC, they got a big three, but two were drafted, and the other one was traded for after his rookie season, where he was, he was coming off the bench. And SGA was essentially built up as an OKC Thunder. And someone's got to dethrone them, bro. Sam Presti finally getting the ring after years with the KD Russ Harden days. They didn't get the ring in 2012, 13 years later, and he's still got picks on picks on picks, first round, both rounds, you name it. OKC is set. And if there's ever a time for the Knicks to finally break through this wall of, you're no longer a second round peak. You finally, broke through that wall. You don't want to be peaking at the Eastern Conference Finals the next few years. I'm just going to say, you don't need me to say that. You don't need me to say that. And hopefully Mike Brown knows that, it's time to bring a ring back to MSG. It's time to bring a chip back to the Mecca. And I think he could be the guy to do it. But we got to see, man. But anyway, my fault. I want to get to some other stuff since I've missed so much. We'll get to a little bit of hockey real quick. So offseason, we're in the NBA, in the thick of things with the free agency. I brought up some of the names, like Brooke Lopez going to the Clippers, another one. talking about the Knicks, we brought in Jordan Clarkson and Gershon Yabusele off the bench. Brooklyn traded for Michael Porter Jr. That's pretty much where we'll leave it for the NBA. You're talking about the hockey in terms of the locals, the Rangers. Still kind of restructuring the roster, the cap situation. Keandre Miller, the latest of the cord to be dealt. Staying in the division, he's going to Carolina. And in return, we got back a first-rounder, second-rounder, and defensive prospect Scott Morrow. Pretty solid player from everything I've seen. I think he got some time in the NHL last year down in Raleigh. I'll say this, bro. Until I see it in a Rangers jersey on our main roster, if I see the same level of production, bro, I got to see it to believe it. Because, I mean, look, I saw the stat with Keandre Miller. He is the final one of the 6 first-round picks in that 3-year stretch, 2017 and 19. That was like a little bit before the letter. Off the top of my head, I think it was Elias Anderson, Filipino, Kratsov, Nils Lundqvist, Capo Caco, and most recently, Keandre Miller. The fact that Keandre Miller is the most talented, successful one out of those 6, you're going to have people say it's Caco. There's no way. It's Keandre Miller. And, bro, Keandre Miller showed flashes. There were times where I said he'd probably work out better as a winger with how brain dead he'd be in our zone. Whereas, with the puck, he could make a play or two. There were times I was saying you pull a reverse Brent Burns and just try it out, throw crap at the wall, see if it sticks. And they never did that. And, it's kind of like something like those. So, those brain dead plays, on the defensive side of the rink, those said brain dead moments in our zone, dumb passes in front of the slot, stuff like that. I mean, how many times you see the guy make an errant pass, you blink and the puck's in the back of the net. And it wasn't just like once or twice. It was a reoccurring thing. And another thing a lot of people got on him for was the lack of physicality, especially for a guy of his size that just did not really, was rarely on the board, stuff like that. It just kind of felt like there was potential at, even though we saw more of a glimpse from him than any of the other names I brought up, like Anderson, Kratsov, forget it. We never saw nothing. Kako, you saw a little bit, but for what we should have seen, it sucks. Like Hedel was solid for years too. I got to be fair. It was just like an injury thing with him. Now we don't even know if he'll ever play for Vancouver again. He had another concussion thing, but Keandre Miller, I think it's safe to say, wound up being the most successful out of those. And the fact that there was still so much potential to be had that we never saw is just kind of like the final kick to the you-know-where of that era of Rangers development. Now it's officially gone. I mean, Lafreniere, Schneider, and them are kind of drifted into the Drury era. But, hey, man, it was just the same old story of underutilization, underdevelopment of the younger players. And that's why I'm not going to get excited about a Morrow or a guy like Scott Morrow until I see it, at the NHL level in a New York Ranger jersey. That's why even a guy like Brennan Othman, Brett Berard, Gabe Perreault we just called up. I mean, how mismanaged the Gabe Perreault situation was. You burned a year off his entry-level contract to play in 6 games, and then Laviolette had him glued to the bench. This is talking about Laviolette was basically a foregone conclusion to be out the door. 1 foot out the door. It was essentially a kamikaze mission for, the guy that was a steal. The fact that he even dropped to us at, 20? The pick we had, Landon Perreault, and they're still trying to find a way to screw it up. And, even this year, the guy we drafted with Malcolm Spence, second round, I heard he was 15, 20th, overall projection. I got to see it at the NHL level, bro. And that's why Scott Morrow on the surface feels like a good return. But until I see it in a Ranger jersey, I'm going to be hesitant, bro. But in the meantime, Vladislav Gavrikov coming from LA, heading over to MSG, 7-year deal, $7 million AAV with a no movement clause on the first 5 years of the deal. I'll say this, bro. It's kind of apples to oranges, kind of contrary to the name of this podcast. But I remember 2017, 2018, whichever year it was, I remember live tracking the Kevin Shattenkirk sweepstakes. I'll never forget. There was someone hacked his Wikipedia, said he signed with the Devils. I was freaking out. It's 10-year-old me. And then the fact that we ink him to the 4-year deal and he does not even last to see year 3. We had the buyout, two more years of the buyout and all that. And just overall, another one is, Trouba. You signed Trouba to that 8-year deal, and a couple years later, you're forcing his hand to go to Detroit. The whole thing with his wife, and he winds up going to Anaheim, talking about the rite of passage to get fired. I mean, it feels like every time we add, established defenseman from outside the organization, it winds up being a shish show. And Gavrikov, it might be unfair to label some of those other, past instances on him, but handing a 5-year no move clause to a defensive minded, defenseman, and that's the other thing too. The no movement clauses. I mean, they're throwing them out like on the street. It's like a giveaway. A participation trophy. Everybody's getting no movement clauses. It's really, Barkley Goodrow, Trocheck, who I love Tro. I think he should be him or Miller should be the next captain. Which, by the way, I got to get to Chris Kreider. Talk about Anaheim captain, all that. We got to get to Kreider in a second. What is with the fascination with the NMCs? That's why when you're hitting the panic button trying to move these guys, it's impossible. Mika would probably be gone too, but he's got an NFC, and he said he ain't going anywhere. And you can't say a thing about it because of the NFC. It was a miracle he got rid of Goudreau. And he was like kicking and screaming. He didn't want to go back to San Jose. On that note, Kreider, the longest tenured player for years upon years, the lone remaining player from the 2014 Cup final run. The infamous plane picture, the whole team picture on the plane. But it's crazy now that with Kreider out the door, we bring back JT Miller, so there's still one player remaining from that picture. But hey, man, I'll say this really quick, kind of like a eulogy, soliloquy, whatever the word is. Chris Kreider, for years upon years, I could always say, was the one Ranger that was a Ranger for the entirety of my lifetime. The entirety of my life as a New York Ranger fan, which goes back as far as I can remember. Now, I don't know if I can remember the 2012, 13, 14 years as vividly. I was like 6 years old, but, growing up, he was like the one guy that survived the letter. Zuccarello didn't survive the letter. Kevin Hayes didn't survive the letter. Mack Truck, JT Miller, even at the time, is, him kind of being part of what felt like him being part of the future. It was like the purge with the letter. Nobody was surviving the letter, but Chris Kreider survived the letter. And for better or worse, the last few years of that deal still look brutal. Now it's Verbeek and Anaheim's problem, but all the moments that came with him surviving the purge of the letter. I'll never forget the third period of Game 6 against Carolina. He said, and I was getting on him. I said, because when we lost Game 5 and he had the presser, he said, if you told me after 5 games we were up 3-2, I'd be pretty happy. And I said, you got to be shitting me. You're talking about being up 3-0 and comparing it to going back and forth through 5 games. I said, you got to be shitting me. But the fact that he took the game, he said, hold my beer, this, and that, and put up a Hattie in the third period when they were losing at the time. Keep in mind, they were legitimately facing Game 7 when they were up 3-0 straight in the eye. And Kreider said, watch this, put up not 1, not 2, but 3 goals in the third period and won that series. And I'll never forget that, bro. And it's crazy. We're talking about a guy who's been, like I said, the lone guy to stick through the tough times from 2014 all the way to 2024. Obviously the dark days of David Quinn, which, by the way, David Quinn's back. I forgot to mention that. Mike Sullivan bringing back David Quinn on his staff. But the fact that Kreider survived the letter and all that, and some of his best moments as a Ranger were post-letter is pretty damn cool. Like the 50-goal year in 22, man. So, legend, debate to be had as to whether or not 20 should be in the rafters. You look at the stats and where he ranks all time in Rangers history, the goals, the points, but I just feel like, I don't know. I don't want to cap off the Kreider tribute saying he shouldn't have his number retired, so I'm going to leave it at that. But there's a debate. I'll leave it at that. There's a debate to be had. And one thing I think the majority of the fan base could agree on is, we're not gonna miss his contract, but we're gonna miss having him around. So Chris Kreider, once a Ranger, always a Ranger. now his contract's Anaheim's problem. So, hey, Trouba, Kreider, Frank Vetrano, Ryan Strome, they're the Anaheim Rangers now. So Verbeek's building a squad out there. That's pretty much it. I mean, real quick on the locals, the Islanders making moves. Matthew Darch, the new GM with Lamariello stepping down. Matthew Darch, I'll say Darch. Pretty damn good first offseason. He hit a grand slam and some at the draft. Obviously, they win the lottery. They get the first pick. They take Matthew Schaefer. And then they get the back-to-back first rounders, trading Noah Dobson to Montreal. They get Emil Heineman, and then back-to-back middle first-round picks. The whole talk of the town was if they were going to trade up, take James Hagen, local kid, James Hagens, out from Long Island. They wind up that, Hagens goes to Boston, but they wind up getting Victor Eklund, who was like late top 10 projected. They get him at 15, and then they get the kid Aitchison right after him. So you get the 3 first rounders. Then you go get Jonathan Drouin to like $2 million AAV, which is nothing pretty much for a guy who was playing top line minutes for Colorado last year. And then you get this guy Shabanov out of Russia. It was like down to the Islanders, the Rangers, and Utah. And you see some of the highlights from this kid, bro. He was lighting it up in the KHL. So if he could be any, resemblance of what he was doing out in Russia, man, the Islanders had a good offseason. And getting off the books on Dobson, he was asking for like $10.5 million, which is crazy. Good player, but he ain't worth $10 million plus. I'll say that. So, Islanders really had a good offseason. Devils not so much. They added Connor Brown, Evgeny Dadonov, bottom 6 wingers, not really much to that. But I feel like they're still in the best spot out of the 3 tri-state area organizations. So that's pretty much it for the hockey. Episodes are already at a half hour, so I don't want to go too long, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the baseball teams in this town. And what better time to get back to to get the podcast back on the road when the Mets and the Yankees still currently over 500 and like 8, 9, 10 games over 500. It's not like they're flirting with 500 game by game. They're legitimately, over 500 teams. You wouldn't tell that from the way they've been playing the last few weeks. And it kind of feels like a seesaw. Who's been worse? The Mets just took 2 or 3 from Milwaukee. Yankees got swept up north against Toronto, so much so they just got leapfrogged in the AL East, a division a lot of people thought was called about a month ago. The old Salicata. The NL East is over. People were pulling that with the AL East, and all of a sudden Toronto's in first currently. The Yankees are at second. Tampa's breathing right down their necks. Everybody was talking about Detroit's like the one big bad threat in that AL. All of a sudden, the Yankees aren't even winning the AL East as we speak. And for the Mets, a Mets team that was also leading their division has been leapfrogged by Philly for like the past week and a half, although that one had been kind of neck and neck the whole time. But Philly really didn't have as down of a stretch as the Mets did at any point this year so far. So, the Mets lost like 13-16. As bad, as embarrassing, and as like dubious of an organization as the Mets are, they have never had a 3-game set as bad as the 3-game set they just had at PNC Park in Pittsburgh. They lost 40 to 3, right? It was legitimately like 40-3. I think that was it exactly. But regardless, they had never lost a 3-game series by that many runs in the history of the organization. We're talking about the team, the teams from the 60s, the pre-Miracle Mets, the Mickey Callaway days, the Louis Rojas days. Some of the most embarrassing teams in MLB history had never put up a 3-game set as bad as the 2025 Mets did in Pittsburgh this past week, where they just took 2 or 3 against a Milwaukee team who was pretty damn good. All of a sudden, you got to ask, do the Mets have the Brewers' number? Obviously, the Miracle Game 3 wild card series. Even kind of you look at last night. I'm recording this July 4th, so now 2 nights ago. The seemingly the slump buster for the Mets to get him out of this rut was Jacob Misarowski, who was only walked onto the mound the other night with a 1.2 ERA and like 8 strikeouts per outing. The guy was unhittable, and then the Mets put up 5 on him in the second inning. It'd always be like that. So, and you're, by the way, keep in mind the Pittsburgh series, they never saw Paul Skeens. They only saw Mitch Keller, who up until that outing had not won an outing besides his first start of the season. So that's how it is. Susan Waldman said it best. That's base, or no. John Sterling said it to Susan Waldman best. That's baseball, Susan. And for a Met, the Mets and Yankees, like I said, it's a seesaw. Who's worse? The Mets got their own problems. There's legitimately no resemblance of a pitching staff left. It's David Peterson and Clay Holmes for a rotation. With Minaya, who knows when he's going to be back. Kodai Senga, they said he'll be back like right around the All-Star break. But from how we've seen him rehab last year with the arm fatigue, with the calf strain, I'm going to take that with a grain of salt. Sean Minaya was supposed to be back like 2 months ago, like 10 different times. He keeps being set back. How could I forget in our rotation, Frankie Montas, who I defended, and then I obviously get shelled in Pittsburgh, and then we see the headline that he thinks he was tipping pitches. Yeah, right. We got to hope he was tipping pitches. Hope this ain't a reoccurring thing with him. You hear Danielle Nunez needs Tommy John. Paul Blackburn's back on the IR. Tyler McGill, God forbid he ever comes back. Same old story with him year after year. And the bats, man, Soto winning player of the month for, whatever it means. The runners at scoring position numbers are still shit. Lindor's been in a total rut. Nimmo's been better. But, it's just like the reoccurring story. Like, they just cannot hit with the runners in scoring position, the runners on base. And that's going to kill them in the long run. Forget now. It's going to kill them in the long run if they can't hit with guys on base. So, that's just kind of how it rolls with the Mets. And, as far as the Yankees, it's just kind of like a whole mix of things as well. Anthony Volpe is kind of like the go-to punching bag this time around. I brought up the names with the Rangers, the underdeveloped names, the Laughs, the Kakos of the world. It feels like Volpe is just the latest one of those for the Yankees, and it's not like they've had their fair share of that either. With Oswald Peraza currently on the team, the names like Estevan Florial and Clint Frazier of years past, the guys that were like the untouchables with the trades. You never want to give them up in a trade for a big bat at a deadline or in an offseason. And you wind up, DFAing them or releasing them for nothing. You played the waiting game time and time again. And in Volpe's case, they committed to him in that offseason where all those perennial all-star caliber shortstops were on the board, right? Correa, Corey Seager, Lindor before he signed the extension with the Mets. I think Javi Baez was that offseason. You see what he's doing now as a center fielder. By the way, one quick thing before I end this. I see a lot of people giving the Mets shit for the PCA Baez trade. They're both starting in center field in the All-Star game. That is total bullshit because everybody got on the Mets, training for Javi Baez. They were like 5 games out of the wild card at the time. They finished like 8 games out of it when it was all said and done that year. I'll say 2 things. One, you see how on that note, the underdeveloped Rangers, underdeveloped Yankees, look at the underdeveloped baby Mets. Francisco Alvarez is a AAA. Brett Beatty sucks. Mark Vientos, we'd be lucky if this was a sophomore slump and not who he truly is. Ronnie Mauricio sucks. The list goes on and on. Luis Angel Acuna got sent down. You get the point. We cannot develop for shit. So who's to say that PCA would have been the exception if we kept him? Because you look at Jared Kelenic, too, another guy we dealt prematurely. Everybody said we got fleeced. He wound up being nothing. So PCA was like the anomaly. And I guarantee you, if we kept him, he would have been the next Alvarez, Acuna, etc. And for Baez played great here. But it didn't matter, and everybody gave him shit, gave the Mets shit regardless. And the fact that, and also you look at the Tigers deal, what is this, year 4 with him in Detroit? His first 3 years were atrocious. People were lumping his contract in with Anthony Rendon and Chris Bryant. Long story short, neither one of them even play anymore, let alone play poorly. They just don't play, period. Javi Baez is being lumped in those comparisons. So for you to say now, people talking about, the Mets would have, Mets going to Met with PCA starting in the NL, Javi Baez in the AL. Javi Baez was shit for the past 3 years, and the Mets would have gotten shit if they signed them to those past 3 years. And who knows if the Mets would have developed PCA into the all-star that he is now with the Cubs. So you got to look at it from the Mets standpoint. The Mets would have signed Baez, would have gotten the same shit 3 years that Detroit had prior to this year. And PCA would have been a bench bat / career pinch runner if we kept him here in Queens. You got to look at it as, that's where the Mets are going to Met. you always got to take shit out of the organization with a grain of salt. So, the All-Stars, on that note, Francisco Lindor announced to his first All-Star game, period, starter, replacement, period, as a New York Met, which is kind of crazy. All the shit we gave him initially was warranted to some. A lot of people, depends on who you ask, but the fact that like last year, even the year before, he never got in, even as a bench bat, is kind of crazy. So congrats to him. Soto made it. I think Pete might have gotten, I think Freddie might have gotten the first base gig, but regardless, he got a couple Met All-Stars. Judge obviously making it, goes without saying. I think Max Fried, he might start. I'm not sure, but Max Fried will be in the pitching staff as well. What a great signing he's been for the Yankees. That whole plan B with Williams and Fried and Bellinger and Goldschmidt. But overall, to sum things up with the baseball, I don't want to go too long. Mets, Yankees, both in a rut, and you could talk about the insurance they have with their records currently. But if you keep playing this lackluster type of ball over time, for the Yankees, Toronto, Tampa going to catch up to you. For the Mets, Philly currently, who knows, Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta's in the dumps right now, but you just cannot count Atlanta out either. But they got to get things back on the road, man, because New York baseball is ugly right now. Sum this all up, we get this, as we kind of wrap things up here tonight. The Knicks, Mike Brown, officially their next head coach. Habemus Papam, we have a coach. The Rangers replace Keandre Miller with Vladislav Gavrikov, ending the Keandre Miller era in New York, or just kind of like that whole, the underdeveloped era of New York prospects. Keandre Miller, the latest to be sent out the door. And with the baseball, the Mets and Yankees back and forth trying to take the title of who is the most fraudulent baseball team here in this town. Both still over 500, but playing some ugly, ugly baseball. And not really much to talk about on the football front. We got a couple more months. I guess like OTAs and stuff are going on right now, but that's about it, man. So it's good to be back on this. Hopefully you like the new additions to the screen. I'm trying out like the bottom third scroll. That's about it, man. Thank you guys for watching on YouTube. Thank you guys for listening, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Check out the code too. I've had it on the bottom scroll. Use code Apples to Apples on SeatGeek for 20% off your first purchase using the app. If you want to go to a ball game or a concert this summer, pretty much anything you could think of. Save yourself 20% off your first purchase using the code Apples to Apples on SeatGeek. But thank you guys once again, and I will see you on the next episode of the Apples to Apples podcast. See you guys.